Hello, you're watching Talking Europe. It's been a year since Israel suffered its worst terrorist attack, with Hamas killing more than 1,000 Israelis and taking more than 250 hostages. Israel's response has devastated Gaza, displacing most of the population and killing more than 41,000 people, according to Gaza health authorities. Meanwhile, Lebanon has again been rocked by the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, with Israel assassinating the Hezbollah leadership, in a response to which Iran launched a massive missile attack on Israel. Further escalation seems certain, despite EU calls for restraint. But beyond words and financial or humanitarian aid, what can the EU actually do? To talk about this, I'm joined by Evin Incir, a Swedish MEP from the Socialists and Democrats. She works on issues related to the Middle East and is also a substitute on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Welcome to you. And I'm also joined by Ivars Ijabs, a Latvian MEP from Renew Europe, and one of the delegations that he's a member of here is the Delegation for Relations with Israel. Welcome to you as well. Welcome back. So the EU is saying that this cycle of attacks risks fueling an uncontrollable regional escalation. Evin Incir, do you think anyone is listening to the EU right now in Israel or in Iran?
Well, it's evident that we need to do more to be listened to, because this escalation of war is just continuing, and we need to contribute to put an end to it. The talks that France is a part of, the talks that the Americans are part of, the talks that the Arab community is a part of also are essential to ensure that we see an end to this bloodshed and see a ceasefire as soon as possible.
We'll come back to what more the EU could actually do concretely, but just to get your thoughts, Ivars Ijabs, on how the EU is responding to this escalation now between Israel and Iran. We can see it's a slightly different, more calibrated remarks perhaps than what's coming out of the White House. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that, first of all, the problem with the EU is that it's split. In a sense that there are countries who are not always so happy to support, to my mind, the only possible solution and the only possible position, which is, well, an unconditional support for the independence and sovereignty of the State of Israel. And we see that there are many different kinds of position on that, but nevertheless, I think that the EU should be much more united on that.
Yeah, speaking of disunity, so there, Evin Incir, we now have 12 out of the 27 member states that have recognized Palestine. Does that make the EU in a worse or better position to try and intervene diplomatically now, do you think?
Well, I would say first and foremost that there are no discussions about the support to Israel. Of course, all the EU member states have been clear on the support to Israel as a state. However, no one is above international law. And therefore, of course, all the actors, Israel, Hamas, and all the actors in the region need to respect international law. As well as I would, as a social democrat, of course, have long time wanted to see a recognition of Palestine equally, the support to the Palestinian Authority, because Hamas is not Palestine and Hamas is not the Palestinian people.
When you said earlier that the EU is not doing enough, what do you mean by that, or what should it do?
Well, I would say that we need to put pressure on the different actors. Hamas is a terrorist organization, conducted heinous terrorist attacks, as, for example, the 7th of October attack. And it was important that the European Union, with one voice, loudly condemned. At the same time, we also need to be able to condemn other kind of violations of international law. Over 40,000 people have been killed in Gaza. That is not respect with international law. Well, and that's also the ruling of ICJ clearly showed that Israel needs to take its share of responsibility to ensure that no more civilians are being targeted.
In this particular situation, we are dealing with a country which openly opposes everything Western and tries to be the hegemony of that region, and that is Iran. Iran is working through its proxies, including Hezbollah, now also including Hamas. I think that the only way we can proceed is to have a really united response to that from the Western world, including the EU, including our transatlantic partners, and including the State State of Israel. Of course, the State of Israel has to be part of that, and it has to listen to its partners, but nevertheless, we should be in clarity about the situation as a whole.
And when it comes to Hezbollah, I suppose the EU is not united as well, because it's only the military wing which is recognized as a terrorist entity.
Well, yes, and the problem is, of course, that, this organization shouldn't take the state of Lebanon as its hostage, and we are currently observing the situation when it's really destroying, actually, the very functioning of that state, which could be an important partner for us in Europe.
I want to come to Lebanon a bit more in a focused way, because the EU has earmarked 74 million euros in humanitarian aid to Lebanon this year, and a financial aid package of 1 billion euros to help with basic services such as health and education, as well as to support economic and security reforms. Here's EU High Representative Josep Borrell speaking about the situation in Lebanon.
This is a moment of truth for Lebanon. Certainly, it's a moment of truth for this country caught in the middle of a war, and the European Union has to collectively commit to preserve its state institutions of the risk of collapsing.
Evan Incher, what do you make of the EU support to Lebanon so far? Do you get a sense that it's making much of a difference, or that it has in the past?
Well, it is important that we continue supporting Lebanon as a state. It has gone through different various contexts and situations and alarming situations, and the current situation is very, very much alarming. I've talked to friends in Beirut, for example, who tells me about how people are sleeping on the streets nowadays and so on. So the people in Lebanon is in need of support immediately. And I must also say that, of course, I have the same view with you, with my colleague on Iran and the heinous regime in Iran. But that's also why I'm saying that no actor in Middle East right now, Hamas, Israel, Iran, Hezbollah, are above international law. So we need to put pressure that all the different actors comply with international law, because also wars have laws. It's called international humanitarian law.
Ivar Zieb, so on Lebanon, do you see the EU making much of a difference?
Well, I mean, the old comparison, EU is not a sheriff. EU is a bartender, much more of that. In that sense, of course, the humanitarian aid has been the main instrument. But, of course, in that sense, I absolutely support what my colleague was saying about the international law. But we shouldn't put a little bit the whole thing in a broader context. The problem is that the territory of Lebanon, just like the Gaza Strip, has been used for much longer time than the October the 7th of the last year for constant attacks to the territory of Israel. And that's why, of course, Israel has always had a very sensitive approach towards its security because of the lack of strategic depth and so on and so forth. Its reaction has been very harsh. We can debate that. We have to involve our Israeli partners in that debate on very strict terms, but nevertheless, we should see the whole thing in a broader context with Iran and with this triangle of evil, if you want, with Iran, Russia, and China.
Do you think the European Parliament specifically has any role to play now, Evin Incher?
Well, of course, when it comes to foreign policy, it is mainly in the hands of the member states. And I would have, first and foremost, want to see a European Union that speaks with one voice and not 27 different voices. And here, High Representative Josep Borrell has been important. And I hope that when the new High Representative, Kaja Kallas, takes over, that she will continue the path that High Representative Borrell has taken, because that would be the only way of ensuring we speak with one voice. And of course, as the European Parliament and as a parliamentarian, the more united we in the Parliament are, the bigger muscles we have to ensure and power to ensure to put pressure on the member states.
Because we've seen actually Josep Borrell not being on the same line as Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, let alone the differences between the member states.
Yeah. Well, what Josep Borrell, as a High Representative, has done is that he has always, on this matter, been on the side of international law, and that has been important. I must say that I was very worried directly after 7th of October which actions that the European Union will take and which path we will. But thanks to Borrell, we have taken the side of international law.
So your colleague mentioned Kaja Kallas.
Well, this is really a very challenging position. I mean, the High Representative, I mean, this is really a very tough job. And I have to say that most of the work of all the previous High Representatives has not always been very satisfying regarding those players also in the Mediterranean, but also Russia and so on and so forth. In that sense, of course, we have a lot of high hopes and expectations from our colleague Kaja Kallas, who is an incoming High Representative, hoping that she would make a difference.
You think she's going to be in a position to push for a two-state solution, perhaps more than her predecessors?
Well, you have to ask her about that, but of course, in that sense, there is a certain continuity, and if the EU opts for the two-state solution, whatever that might mean in particular circumstances, I think that Kaja Kallas is going to stay loyal to the line.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much to both of you, Evin Inshir and Ivars Iyabs, for this discussion on the escalating situation in the Middle East. Do stay with us here on Talking Europe.